It's been 75 years since the birth of modern China, and a lot's happened since then. From housing to healthcare, everything's improved, helping people live fuller, richer lives.
China has contributed to around 70% of global poverty reduction.
Building friendships around the world. That's China's idea of partnership.
Chinese leadership has been very important in bringing peace, security.
From made in China to innovated in China, Chinese tech now leads the way.
China has made wonderful progress in many areas of science and technology.
From a humble beginning to a global economic power, it's a rags to riches tale.
Yes, you can be profitable in China.
We did not observe any country to sustain such a high growth rate.
Ancient philosophy in modern practice. China shows us how we can live in harmony with nature.
When China talks about modernization, it's talking about a green future.
5 episodes, one incredible journey. Buckle up for the CGTN special series Journey to Modernization from September 30 to October 4, only on CGTN.
Hello and welcome to the CGTN special series Journey to Modernization. From a poor country to the world's second largest economy, from rapid economic growth to high quality development, the story of China's economic miracle has been an inspiration for many developing countries around the world. As China marks the 75th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic, it's time to look back and ponder how has China achieved this, and what does the future hold for the country as we are facing an increasingly uncertain world? That's our topic. I'm Xu Qianduo. Joining me for the discussion are Professor Justin E. Fu Lin, Dean of the Institute of New Structural Economics and also Honorary Dean of the School of National Development at Peking University. Thank you, Professor Lin. Adam Dennett, Secretary General of the European Union Chamber of Commerce in China. And Claire Pearson, International Development Director at DLA Piper. And David Mahon, Executive Chairman of Mahon China Investment Management. Welcome to the discussion. Before we start, let's take a look at a video on how a small city in East China's Jiangsu province stands out in attracting foreign investment. Cheers! You might think we are in Bavaria, Germany, but we are actually in Taicang of Jiangsu province, just 30 kilometers away from Shanghai. This area, often called Little Germany, is home to over 500 German companies. Why have Germans chosen to invest so deeply here? I'm checking out some German manufacturers to find out more about their exciting business adventure here in China. Why choose to invest in Taicang?
And we benefit from Taicang's unique geographical position, being close to Shanghai, being close to Suzhou, Nanjing, Hangzhou, all these huge cities. There's a huge market here in the Shanghai Yangtze River Delta that we can tap into, both in Taicang but also in the neighboring cities.
Last year alone, there was $337 million of German registered foreign capital in Taicang, and the German direct investment in China also increased by 4.3% to a record high of 11.9 billion euros.
Taicang government, when we started to express interest, worked very well with us to understand our needs and help us to find the right location, etc., and connect us with other people in the local market that could help us to realize this project.
The funny thing is that I would say in other countries, you maybe have to find out what is the policy. Maybe you don't take benefit of policies because you don't know it or you didn't understand it in the right way. Here it happens that suddenly government representatives say, oh, can I visit you? And you say, yes, okay. And then they will tell you about this new policy that came out where they think this will benefit our company. Sometimes you don't have to study too hard. It is proactive approach.
Easy business, easy life. Some Germans even consider Taicang as their home. Good morning.
Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you. Nice to see you. I met Erwin Gerber in Taicang, who arrived in China in 2012 and opened a traditional German bakery here 3 years later. Now he has 3 stores and plans to open 2 more.
China is really my home. You have a nice environment around. That's why you like to stay. Because I'm German, sometimes you cannot understand this system in China because the Chinese is thinking much more forward than maybe a German. They plan it really not 5 years, not 10 years. They have a really long plan to succeed.
China knows the necessity of opening up to further develop its economy. From expanding visa-free policies to building multilateral platforms for win-win cooperation, the country continues to welcome global engagement. Last year, China attracted about 54,000 foreign invested firms, up about 40% year on year.
China is not a market you can abandon if you want to grow your company in the next decades. I saw one quote recently that said China is the next China.
Taicang has become an international hub, now hosting over 500 German enterprises. Its success is a testament to China's committed reform and opening up policy, which has continued unabated for over 40 years. Now China has shown its doors are open to the world and will only open further in the years to come. Well, Professor Lin, look at the video clip there. The attitudes seems to be playing an important role in attracting foreign investment, being proactive, being flexible. Is that typical of Taicang, or is it also reflective of the attitudes in general to the Chinese government at different levels?
I think it's common in China. Every government at every levels in China, and I try to provide a good business environment for investors, both domestic investors and international investors. And for China, it's a good destination for foreign direct investment for several reasons. One reason, as you mentioned, the Chinese government is very proactive, try to be accommodative, try to meet the needs of the investors, to improve the infrastructure, to simplify the regulation, to lower the cost of production in China. But China is a good destination for foreign direct investment. There are some other reasons. One, China has the fastest expansion of domestic market. As you know, China contributes about 1/3 of global growth every year. China, contribute 1/3 of the market expansion in the whole world. Certainly, it will be very attractive for anyone, right? Secondly, China is one of the best production platform, not only sharing the goods to China, but also sharing the goods to the world, because we have very well-educated, disciplined, skillful workers. And that's our competitive advantages. Plus, we have very good infrastructure business environment. So making China, and in addition to that, we also have one of the best supply chain. And make the investment in China, the production in China, can have a very competitive edge comparing to production in any other part in the world. So for those reasons, I think that China currently is receiving the most foreign direct investment among all the developing countries. And even included the developed country, I think in terms of the direct investment in manufacturing, China is also the #1 destination in the world.
Well, Claire, you were nodding your head, so you agree? I mean, the China market remains attractive to foreign investors?
Yeah, I absolutely agree, Chindo. Actually, too attractive to foreign investors. It's making my job very, very busy at the moment. So I think at the moment, you know, after the 5-year travel hiatus, the future thinkers, the future leaders, the business brains are coming to China. So the way I've seen this recently is I went to DC and London with some Chinese friends, and then we came back to Beijing last week to have some policy discussions to see which businesses should be apply themselves to the China market in which order, according to current government incentives after the third plenum. So what I really like about doing business here, it's just what Professor Lin said. You know, you can go to Beijing and you can find out the policy. It's not hidden from you. So I highly recommend companies to come to China now.
First of all, let me say I love the video documentary, really warming and touching
Thank you.
to see that. And there's lots of stories like that in China, and I think it's really important to get those stories out there. So I appreciate the work that you're doing there. And then your question to Professor Lin about the flexibility and proactiveness of the government, I think that's one of the hallmarks of China's development as well. I remember about over 20 years ago seeing a documentary on the business environment here in China, and they were interviewing foreigners at that time, foreigners who had been in China in the 90s and the early 2000s, and they were describing the change that China went through after joining the WTO in that period. And they described the 90s as a period of basically trying to get permits to build things in construction. But in the 2000s, they described it as it was the Meiwenti era.
No problem.
And everything was possible. And I think that's another trademark and success story. And then, I have to comment on Claire's story and tell everybody a funny story. I was back home last summer, and I was in a library, a train museum library. And I pulled out a book, and it was from, I think it was from 1981 or 1982. It was a beautiful colored book. I think it was intended for children. And the title was Fastest Trains of the World. And I opened it up, and it had a chapter on Britain, a chapter on France, a chapter on Germany, a chapter on Japan. Not a single chapter on China, obviously. And now today, China has the largest, fastest train network in the world, larger than the rest of the world even combined. So lots of great stories, and I'm glad we can share those there.
Yeah, the kind of certainty. Well, before I have Professor Lin to respond, David, what's your comment on that? You know, on one hand, you do see some people to see China's future remains bright. On the other hand, people do see there are rising challenges.
We're kind of moving into a similar period because of the geopolitics. All these commercial opportunities have been well explained, and the advantages, I think, correctly identified. China is a lot easier to do business in than it has been at any time. But from a global perspective, a lot of multinational companies are being restrained from doing business here because they're worried, as Adam said, about some fallout from a security-related issue. And look at the way that America has applied tariffs to Chinese goods on the basis of national security. I look at this ridiculous spat with Europe, where EVs are going to be sanctioned effectively. And now China's preparing to look at dairy products from the European Union. I think it's cream and cheese. So, you know, that's difficult. So I think it's very hard. We lost a client, a British client who was involved in the aviation sector. And because they sold to America, they stopped developing their business here because they were afraid they would be unable to continue to sell to the US. So the challenge going forward is geopolitical, and we need to see China going. I think China's working very hard at the moment to break down the barriers, to have proper dialogue again. I think this is something we now need, particularly as the government changes in Washington, another push, and to resolve the tensions in the region. Because all of this will make China look more confident. It will also help foreign investors feel that existential threat. You know, I don't believe in the Taiwan threat. I never have. I think it's a kind of a lazy way of talking about a potential crisis. It's not going to happen, not in the foreseeable future. But we need to see China resolving that in foreign investors' minds. It's not easy, but it's very important. There's too much conflict. There's too much friction at the moment.
I have some figures. If you look at the Chinese economy, for example, in the past 10 years, the decade, the Chinese economy experiences an average annual growth rate of more than 6%, and also contributing over 30% to the global economic growth. Absolute poverty is gone, and per capita GDP has exceeded $12,000 for 3 consecutive years. So obviously, we have done something right to achieve such a feat, Professor Lim.
Yeah, certainly Chinese growth has been a miracle, and in '78, China was one of the poorest countries in the world because, according to the World Bank statistics, in 1978, the per capita GDP was $156. At that time, the average per capita GDP in sub-Saharan African country was $495. China was less than 1/3 of that level, but in the past 45 years, the average annual growth rate has been 8.9%. We did not observe any country to sustain such a high growth rate for such an extended period of time. So there must be many things that China has done right.
But of course, keep that in mind. Still, we're looking at the current status quo of the economy, and in particular, the future. We talked about the uncertainty. And if you look at the current economic performance, there are concerns about deflation, as you mentioned, also consumption, and also risks from this uncertain world, rising, say, between the tensions between China and the U.S. Claire, I mean, you have been working in China for decades. What's your observation? Where are we now? I mean, in particular, show us what's the prospect, what's the next?
Yeah, I'm not nervous at all because I've seen 4 5-year plans delivered back to back. So when clients say, should we come to China? I'm just like, yeah, come, because all your competitors are already here. So I'm very direct because I can see the size of the middle class now. I can see it's going to double, it's going to quadruple in the next 10 years because you can't stop people wanting to get wealthy. And to Professor Lin's point, I think it's a very good point that the government has created the preconditions for growth. My brother's had a good business here. He set up in Hangzhou and Ningbo in 2008, doing a branding company. He did all the packaging, brands, and a multiplicity of language because he could photograph the product. He could have the web designer in Hangzhou create the international brand, and then he could produce the packaging in Ningbo and ship the product out without ever having to send the product back to the UK and then back to China to create. China now has a 360. It has the complete skill set to do everything from branding inception to packaging delivery in a multiplicity of European languages. So whereas China used to be factory of the world, it's now becoming investor in the world. And too many people, I've just been in the US and I've just been in the UK, And when you are fundamentally Chinese thinking but overseas looking Western, it's very complicated. You have to learn to lean out and listen. The misconceptions about China are so great. China is not different to the US whatsoever. Everybody wants good education for their kid. They want a comfortable business life. They want to move up the value chain. US and China are remarkably similar. So I really like what you said, Professor Lin. There is intellectual property in economic delivery that is peculiar to Chinese CEOs and government officials. And I just listened to you there, Professor Lin, speaking good English, describing the balance between the state and the capitalist sector. And I suddenly realized we need people like you to come to the UK. I wish there were more government officials in the UK who could speak to you in Mandarin, because the China miracle in the last 2 decades needs to be understood and needs to be fed into the MBAs.
David, adding to that, sometimes even, there are good decisions, but there are it creates challenges. For example, in the EV sector, there's overcapacity accusation from the US, from the European Union, the investigation, we are waiting whether there will be tariffs or not. How do you respond to, how should China respond to the overcapacity tariffs, the development of the EVs? There are concerns, and for the export, I mean, you have done the right decision to develop, say, the renewable energy, renewable technologies, not only for industry but also to deal with climate change. Everybody says that's the right thing to do, but now you have a challenge.
Yes, well, in dealing with these external challenges, sometimes the best thing China can do is nothing. Don't give them fuel. Don't react. Now, because if you look at the motive behind all these things against China, whatever it is, whether it's questioning a base in the South China Sea, or the fact that there were some subsidies involved in the development of battery technology, it's fundamentally the West is trying to block the rise of China, led by Washington. Washington, the American business culture feels challenged. So at any price, they will do what they can to stop China's rise. And history has shown that it never works. And the cost to the country trying to inflict that slowdown on the rising power always pays the highest price. So this is a reality. I agree with all that Claire has said about the business environment here and the need for companies to recognize the future. That's true. And we say the same things to our clients. We have clients of 14, 20 years here. The future is going to be very, very, very much more dynamic than even what we've experienced. But there are the immediate challenges. And these are things it's very hard to deal with when in the boardrooms around the world, your clients are reading Wall Street Journal, The Economist, Washington Post. All of this is negative stuff on China. So that's the reality. I see another change really encourages me, and that is that all the time I've been here, China has been the passive recipient of global demand and adjusted its policies, its manufacturing sector to meet that demand. That's changing. China perceived demand, future demand globally. So now China is beginning to set the trends that will drive the future commercial evolution of the developed world. And also, as we've seen in the recent African summit, the developing world.
Adam.
Yeah. First of all, I want to say I love Claire's enthusiasm. There's so much to celebrate in terms of China's development and success, and I totally agree with what she said about more businesses need to come back here. And again, China's created visa-free policies for 11 member states, and we are seeing companies coming back and visiting, and they have to come and visit. I absolutely agree with you. And I also agree with you that businesses sometimes become overly impacted by what certain media say, and they hype up the situation, and they should focus on their core business, and it can be a distraction. At the same time, you use the e-vehicle example. If you're thinking, okay, well, this is an e-vehicle problem, what does it have to do with me if I'm in a different sector? But all of a sudden, you've got I think as David mentioned, you've got the dairy sector in Europe, you've got the pork sector, you've got the brandy sector. All of them have been hit by investigations that China has launched towards the EU. And so you sort of think, well, this is just politics, it's not going to affect me, but then it does. And I've got these guys showing up at my door, the association, saying, what do we do? We thought this was an e-vehicle problem. Now it's a dairy problem. Now it's a brandy problem. Now it's an aviation problem. And so it's those sorts of things that we need to be mindful of. And again, I think many of our companies, our member companies here, the majority of them are profitable. 69% are profitable. And of all of these trade disputes that are ongoing right now, it affects maybe 4 or 5% of trade between the EU and China. Very, very small amount. We've talked so much about the great economic development of China, but as you were saying, David, as well, how do we move forward? What is the outlook for all of this? And so I like to have the glass half full. Maybe not 95% is full is Claire, but I like the glass half full analogy, and that's why I think it's so important for us to address all of these issues in a very serious way to stop them from becoming an even bigger issue. I don't think we're in a trade war right now, but it could become one. And that's why I think it's, again, important for us to take these issues head on. And then just a thought in terms of the outlook. We also do an annual business confidence survey, and we ask our members, their profitability and their outlook. So again, 2/3 of our members are profitable, but in terms of their outlook for profitability in their sector, it reached an all-time high of negative outlook, 44% this year. That's the highest we've seen on record. So that is a really, really important signal, I think, to the government and to businesses that, yes, you can be profitable in China, but they're not expecting to be profitable. The majority are not expecting to be profitable at the same rate as they were in the past. And so whatever we can do to address those marginal changes or differences, I think will be the best way to ensure that we create the business environment so that more investment comes in the future.
Mm-hmm. Professor Lee?
I fully agree with Adam. We should be serious about the issue on the table. But also, we should not politicize the issue. Let's go back to fundamental economic rationalities. When a country doing export, no matter what kind of goods, you must produce more than what you consume domestically, right? Otherwise, you will not export. No matter it's car, it's dairy product, or electronics. And now China has been accusing overcapacity, dumping in the electronic vehicles and the cars. But let's go back to the fundamental. Germany export 78% of its cars each year. China export 16% of the cars that we produce. Which country is dumping? China or Germany? But we never complain because we think Germany produces a good quality cars at a cost much lower than we can produce. We know Germany export a lot, but we are welcome, right? And now we export a small number of cars to European countries at a cost lower than what we can produce. Then we started to politicize. And I think we should go back to fundamentals. If we come back to fundamentals, trade certainly will benefit every country. But if you pick up some areas, politicize that, and every country can look into the same statistics, then every country is dumping in the world if they export anything, right?
Can I respond? Go ahead, Adam. I mean, the W has its definitions of dumping and trade interference and all that, and we can look at that. And there's a process for dealing with that, and both China and the EU are going through that. Yeah. But I think more important than all of that is, using the analogy that China has, is win-win, right? And the reality is that, I mean, the EU's share in the EU of e-vehicle exports for the last 4 years has doubled every single year. So it's still at a small level now, but the concern is, what is the impact going to be in the future? And has it been done based on market principles? Has it been done, based on cost or below cost? So we'll let the WTO and the trade policy experts in each government figure that out for us. But from a business perspective, I very much want to see a solution being found. And in that regard, I think there's all sorts of ways that we've found solutions in similar cases in the past. Because my view is China's going to be a leading exporter and is the leading technology for e-vehicles now and for the medium term and probably the long future. This is a great opportunity for China. But I think what's important is to manage it in a sustainable way so that these political influences that you're talking about don't raise their voices.
Okay.
But Adam,
I fully agree.
Like when the EU raised the question of overcapacity, they didn't go to the WTO.
Yeah.
They acted unilaterally.
Right.
By threatening to impose tariffs on China. Instead, China filed a lawsuit from the WTO. So, there is the court in the WTO. If we have dispute, we go to the court. And now we are seeing is like they're fighting against each other without going to the court, right?
I think it's important for everybody to know that the EU has gone through the legislative process that's compliant both
but
with,
still
with the
unilateral?
with EU legislation. Well, China's investigations are unilateral. Any country, they talked before. There was dialogue before, which is very, very important. There was dialogue before. There's a process that's followed the legal legislative process in the EU and within the WTO. What's interesting, and again, we want to find solutions to these problems, but I find it amazing that everybody's focused on the EU's actions, which has followed, again, a procedural process. And I don't want to put any other countries in hot water here. But other countries have unilaterally applied them. The EU hasn't even applied them yet. They're still looking at dialogue.
You're talking about the US, right?
I'm talking about 7 or 8 other countries, right?
Certain countries.
Right?
That's a topic for another day. There's a lot to that story. But Professor Lin, here's a question. People are debating vehemently about what should the Chinese government do right now. As we talked about earlier, some people economists arguing for a big stimulus package to stimulate consumption, to create jobs, to basically energize the market, the economy. Others would be more cautious, but they are the minority now. What's your opinion? What should we do right now?
Well, it depends on what are the roots of the problems. If the problem is a shock, temporary shock, then supporting consumption would be desirable. But if the problem is structural, then supporting consumption is not sustainable. And from what I see, most of the problem is structural, related to, as I mentioned, the change in the global economic structure and the deceleration in the global growth. Under the kind of situation, certainly currently slowing down in the Chinese economy, and we have excess capacity in certain sectors. For example, our electronic household wealth. And we do not see the global demand is going to pick up soon. And for that to support consumption, currently Chinese government has a program to address the issue that combine short-term support and long-term structural change together. For example, because in the past, refrigerators and so on, they are very energy intensive. And now we have the green way of the refrigerators. So to encourage the replacement of all the consumption goods with new green consumption goods. And those kind of policy combine the structural change with the short-term needs would be desirable. But overall, I think the way out is further development. Because in China, we have a saying, a wisdom. Development is the foundation and the key to address anything, including the under including the lower than expected growth rate and employment rate and so on.
Mm-hmm. Well, David, if you, of course, this is, I think, a quite influential understanding or perspective of the Chinese economic status quo. As Professor Lin has said, China's economy is going through a fundamental structural shift from relying on, in the past, for example, real estate sector, export, heavy investment, to probably new economic drivers, high technology like in EV, 5G, AI, etc. So the effects or the painful effects right now we're going through with, say, unemployment is up, for example, consumption, etc. Is it short term? Is it middle term? I mean, how long that will be? Or how should we respond to that kind of challenge?
It's now time to make sure that the consumer's confidence can really be recovered, bolstered. There are so many areas where Chinese government could be making a difference. Take the pressure off households, resolve the issue of insecurity over the quality of healthcare. The state can step up and be there a lot better than it is. Alleviate the pressure around education, the cost of education. We have a falling birth rate. Is it a bad thing? No. There are many forces here demographically that I think are quite positive. So now China, without putting cash into people's hands, can lift the pressures and burdens off them to allow them to return to become investors and consumers more confidently again. What they mustn't do is increase the supply side, which is a temptation because they have a number of pathways into the market to influence it, and those are the state-owned enterprises. I'm not arguing against their proportion of the economy, but if you constantly use SOEs to implement your foreign policy, your economic policies, then you risk having that stimulus end up in the wrong part of the economy. So it's time now to stimulate the economy. Again, not cash in people's hands, they'll just put it in the bank and they'll wait. Create an environment in which they can recover more confidence. Send out strong signals, which the government can do. The Ministry of Finance in China is one of the most gifted in the world in terms of real intellectual understanding, people of true experience. This is a technocratic nation in some ways. It's a hell of a lot better than the people that in my country, New Zealand, I'll say this, get the finance portfolio, the health portfolio, they get it because they're politicians. In China, you get it because you know what you're doing. So I think they understand the economy, but now it's time to really begin some quantitative easing. We have a trade surplus with most countries. We have low inflation. In those environments, you don't risk destabilizing the economy by stimulating it. So I think that's the answer going forward.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's turn to our audience to see if they have any comments or questions. Okay, that young lady in white t-shirt, please.
My question goes to Professor Lin. What can we expect from Chinese modernization? What new opportunities will there be?
Now we have the Chinese ways of modernization, and we have 5 characteristics of that Chinese way, because we have 1.4 billion population, and we hope all the people in China could enjoy modern, means modern life. That's first characteristic. Not only part of that, everyone, no one left behind. Secondly, certainly we want to improve our material life, but we also like to improve our spiritual life. We like to have a harmony our external and our internal life. Certainly, we also want to have a harmony between the economic development and the natural sustainability. So we like to have improvement of ecosystem together with our material life. And certainly, we like to have, continue to have a Chinese development contribute to the development of all the countries in the world, so we can enjoy, the modernization altogether. So we'll continue to open our country, and that will be, the picture for the Chinese modernization.
Okay, any more questions? Yes, the girl in black in the first row, please.
My question goes to Mr. Adam. As students, we care a lot about the unemployment issue. So how worried should we be about that?
When I speak with our members, a lot of the challenges they face is there's a lot of graduates often, but they can't find the right graduate with the right skill set for the job they're looking for. So I think there's a number of things. One is, if we look at the European and German model in particular, there's a lot of great trade schools in Germany, and it's a very respected profession to go into the trade school. I know people can do that here at 16 in China as well, but that sector isn't developed, and I don't think it has the recognition and support that it needs to drive people in that direction. And then for the new digital age that we're in, developing AI skills, digital skills is extremely important. That's why, again, access to information is so important. And I would also say learning English for a lot of people, again, global economy that we're in is important. So glad to see people here, and I hope the government continues to support English and other language education as well. And then lastly, the hukou reform that people were talking about, obviously, China's had such great success, and that's been part of it with, broadly speaking, majority benefits for cities. Maybe not for everyone, but as it's been reformed, there's more freedom of movement in China, which has been good, but actually that hasn't happened as much here in Beijing. And so what I would like to see, particularly for my staff, employees, and my members that are here in Beijing, is to see the Gaokao system reformed so that families that have moved to Beijing can have their children educated here and go through the Gaokao process here instead of having to go back home and take their families, when they get to 15, 16 years of age.
With that, we are concluding today's discussion. I'd like to thank our panel of distinguished guests and audience for joining us for this special series of CGTN Journey to Modernization. I'm Xu Qianzhuo. See you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Lee.